The late 1970s and early 80s saw the rise of two cultural phenomena: the explosion of video gaming and the unstoppable force of Star Wars. It was only a matter of time before the two collided, bringing the epic battles of a galaxy far, far away into arcades and homes all across the world. In 1983, Star Wars the arcade game allowed players to step into the cockpit of an X-Wing, reliving the climactic Death Star assault from A New Hope. With vector-based graphics and thrilling dogfights, it captured the imagination of gamers and Star Wars fans alike, becoming one of the earliest and most iconic depiction of George Lucas's universe in video games. Today, we're going back to those early days of Star Wars in gaming. We're going to take a look at the first handful of Star Wars video games, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the origins of Star Wars as a universe in itself. So grab your lightsaber, power up your X-Wing, and join us for today's force-filled trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 245th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we're exploring a galaxy far, far away with a look at early Star Wars video games, starting with the Star Wars arcade in 1983. We'll also be having some fun looking at the origins of Star Wars itself. You know, from vector graphic dogfights to lightsaber battles, these were the video games that kind of laid the groundwork for what are now decades of interactive Star Wars adventures. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably crash an X-Wing into the Death Star and claim it was part of the plan. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, do you think you'd be the one leading the charge, or would you just kind of get lost trying to fly out of the hangar bay?
That entirely depends on how good the mini-map is.
Yeah, we do have a lot of opportunity for all of this now, don't we?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
To mess around and play in the Star Wars universe.
Oh yeah. I have a mobile game for Star Wars that I play every day on my phone, so,
True statement. Well, I got a whole bunch of Star Wars stuff for today, and so we'll get into it. But before that, why don't we cover really quickly what else happened during this week in gaming history?
All right, well, kicking it off on May 5th, 1980, Mystery House was released by Online Systems, marking a major turning point in video game history as the first graphical adventure game. Designed by Roberta Williams and programmed by her husband Ken Williams, Mystery House blended text-based interaction with simple but effective black and white visuals to create a new level of immersion and storytelling. Its murder mystery plot and visual interface laid the foundation for the modern graphic adventure genre, directly influencing countless titles that followed. We dug deeper into this pioneering classic back in episode 89 of our podcast, where we explored Roberta Williams' groundbreaking contributions to gaming and the birth of Sierra Online. So to learn more, go check it out.
Yeah, episode 89, all about the queen of adventure games.
Absolutely. Next up, on May 10th, 1996, Zelda's Adventure was released for the Philips CDI, marking the third and final installment of the infamous CDI Zelda trilogy. Developed by Viridis and published by Philips Interactive Media, the game diverged from its predecessors by adopting a top-down perspective reminiscent of the original The Legend of Zelda, and featured live-action full-motion video, FMV cutscenes, instead of animation. In a rare twist for the series, players controlled Princess Zelda on a quest to rescue Link from the clutches of Ganon, by retrieving 7 celestial signs across the island of Telemac. Despite its ambitious approach, Zelda's adventure was met with overwhelmingly negative reception due to sluggish controls, lengthy load times, and low production values. The game has since become a cautionary tale in gaming history, often cited as one of the worst entries in the Zelda franchise.
Wah, wah,
Yeah,
wah.
if you want, go watch some of the cutscenes out on YouTube. You'll understand.
Oh, yeah, you will. It
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
take much.
No, it does not. Next up, on May 7, 2001, Myst 3 Exile was released, continuing the iconic puzzle adventure series with a new developer, Presto Studios, at the helm. Set a decade after the events of Riven, the game follows the player, known as the Stranger, as they pursue Saavedro, a man seeking vengeance for past wrongs committed by Atris's sons. Exile introduced a 360-degree free look system, enhancing immersion as players navigated through visually rich ages like Amateraea, Idana, and Voltaic. The game's intricate puzzles and atmospheric storytelling were well received, solidifying its place in the Myst franchise.
We did a whole episode on Myst. Maybe not specifically on Myst 3, but we covered the origins of the Myst franchise.
Indeed.
It's an interesting story.
Yes, you should find the episode.
Certainly.
Yeah, dig through the archives and see what else you like.
Do it.
Next up, on May 6, 2003, EVE Online launched, introducing players to a vast, persistent sci fi universe where every action could ripple across a single shared galaxy. Developed by Icelandic studio CCP Games, EVE stood apart from other MMORPGs with its player driven economy, real time skill progression, and open ended gameplay that encouraged roles ranging from industrial magnates to ruthless pirates. Its sandbox design fostered complex political alliances, massive player run corporations, and legendary conflicts like the Battle of BR5RB, where in game losses were valued at over 300,000 US dollars.
Wow.
Over the years, EVE Online has evolved. Over the years, EVE Online has evolved through numerous expansions, maintaining its reputation as one of the most intricate and community driven online games ever created. That's insane.
It really is.
Ugh. And last up for this week in gaming history, on May 4th, 2004, Red Dead Revolver was released for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox, introducing players to a gritty Western world steeped in revenge and frontier justice. Originally developed by Angel Studios and later completed under Rockstar San Diego after the studio's acquisition, the game laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the Red Dead franchise. With its unique characters, comic book style presentation, and fast paced gunplay, Red Dead Revolver delivered a stylized take on the Wild West that stood out at the time. We revisited this trailblazing title and the fascinating history of its development studio back in episode 36. So if you want to learn more, go there and listen.
Go there and listen. Yeah. Rob, I thought today, in celebration of another birthday for Star Wars entry into gaming long, long ago, that we could kind of have some fun talking about how Star Wars came to be. Thought maybe there'd be a lot of people out there who maybe had never really looked at the history of Star Wars and how Lucas wrote it and where the ideas came from. So I thought I'd touch a little bit on that for fun. Just kind of a little lighthearted bit, not take it too serious like normal. And then we're going to touch base on the early handful of Star Wars video games, the entirety of them. And the reality is that the idea to make a space opera, which is what Star Wars is, was with George Lucas for quite a while. And if you don't know, a space opera has nothing to do with music. It's a subgenre of science fiction that features large scale, often melodramatic space adventures that involve interstellar conflict, chivalric romance, and like significant stakes. Like, there's universe implications to what's going on. It's an opera in the sense that opera music is melodramatic, and a space opera is a melodramatic subgenre of science fiction. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Originally, George Lucas had this idea that he wanted to film the space adventure comic book series Flash Gordon. You know, he wanted to turn it into films, but when he went to purchase the rights, he found that they had already been acquired. And so when Flash Gordon was no longer an option, he began to write his own space opera, you know, little bits here and there while working on other projects until he started it full time. And from beginning to end, there are historically at least four different scripts for this movie. And if you've never looked at it before, it's really kind of fascinating and worth taking a little bit of time to look at how the story changed and what kind of didn't change from beginning to end. In his earliest notes, which was like January of 1973, the first time George Lucas put pen to paper when it came to Star Wars, he wrote a 2-page synopsis and he titled it Journal of the Wills. And it told a tale of a character named CJ Thorpe, who was what's known as an apprentice Jedi Bendu. And he was being trained by a legendary character named Mace Windy. Right?
That's good. Mace Windy.
Mace Windy.
Although
And
Bendu, that's a familiar name.
And so he kind of took the synopsis and in April, and it's fascinating because he dated everything. So it's like we have direct historical records of all this. Like he started writing this next treatment on April 17th, 1973. Like we have the exact date.
Wow. Damn, that's impressive.
His first treatment for this for Star Wars was called The Star Wars. It was a 13-page treatment. He started it on April 17th, and by May, sometime in May, he had expanded that treatment into a full 132-page rough draft. And that version of the draft paralleled the narrative of Kurosawa's 1958 film called The Hidden Fortress. And the Hidden Fortress is all about a princess that is being escorted across enemy lines with the help of reluctant warriors. And the Hidden Fortress, if you don't know, is kind of seen through the eyes of bumbling sidekicks. And this initial version of the script had a character named Anakin Starkiller. And Anakin Starkiller was originally an older general who came from a family of dwarfs. But by the time he finalized the version of the script, he kind of turned Anakin Killer into like the old general became someone else, and Anakin Starkiller became an adolescent boy. He envisioned a Corellian gambler called Han Solo, who was a large green-skinned monster with gills.
Okay.
And it did include Chewbacca. Everybody knows Chewbacca. Chewbacca was inspired by his Alaskan Malamute. That script also had the Sith in it, and it had the Death Star in it. So there are a lot of common elements that we know ended up in the final version of Star Wars, right?
Right.
By January of 1975, he had completed a second draft, and the title of the second draft was Adventures of the Star Killer, Episode 1, The Star Wars. In this draft, he introduced a young farm dwelling hero as a character named Luke Starkiller. He made some changes to characters. Chewbacca is very much like we know him today. Han Solo was no longer a green skinned monster. He was more so like the Han Solo that we know today. And the reality is that it's the second draft that he introduced a mystical energy known simply as the Force. This draft has the concept of a Jedi turning to the dark side, and it included the story in the script of a historical Jedi. The history was of a historical Jedi who turned to the dark side and then subsequently trained the Sith, who became the bad guys. This script also included a Jedi Master with a son who trains to be a Jedi under his father's friend.
Nice.
So there's a lot going on in this one, right? Not
Yeah.
only is there a lot going on, but these are things that we now know are in Star Wars, but not just one Star Wars, right? Those are concepts that kind of have been split up amongst the frankly the original trilogy, right?
Right.
Now that draft ended up being over 200 pages long,
Jeez.
right? For those of you that don't know screenwriting, a really rough rule of thumb is a page is a minute, right? So 200 pages, 200 minutes, yeah, that's not going to work for a lot of
Yeah,
people.
no.
So George Lucas kind of knew this, right? And he then took these stories and he split them up amongst multiple films. And actually, from there, was able to split up his story into multiple trilogies off this second draft, which we now know is the case. There are multiple. There's three trilogies, right? Trilogy of trilogies.
Yeah, true.
His third draft, dated August 1st, 1975, was titled "The Star Wars from the Adventures of Luke Starkiller." And it presented Luke as an only child whose father was already dead, and Luke Starkiller was being cared for by a man named Ben Kenobi. Now, this version has most of the elements that ended up in the final plot of the original Star Wars movie, though the characters and locations were different. And to be fair, I didn't kind of start there, but when he wrote that two-page synopsis, he really started out writing by just coming up with bizarre names for people and places, a lot of which he has actually reused over the years as Star Wars has progressed into a bigger universe. Now, the fourth and final draft, which was dated January 1st, 1976, was titled this is the title of Star Wars at this point. The Adventures of Luke Starkiller as taken from the Journal of the Wills, comma, Saga 1, The Star Wars.
That's a hell of a name.
Can you imagine?
It would not have gone as well as it did.
It would not have gone as well as it did in any way, shape, or form. So, something you may not know about Star Wars, something that you may find hard to believe at this point, given the sheer scope of the Star Wars universe in 2025, is that Lucas actually struggled to find a studio that was willing to take a chance on this film and fund the production of it. Going into the project, he thought he had it all figured out because back in May of 1971, he signed a two-picture deal with the United Artists, UA, who agreed to pick up both his movie American Graffiti and his space opera idea because he pitched it, at the time it was just an idea. In the end, though, United Artists declined on the entirety of the deal. They didn't even come to the table to pick up American Graffiti. Universal Pictures ended up financing American Graffiti, but they doubted George Lucas's ability to see the space opera through, so they declined on that funding that project. So at one point, George Lucas went to a friend of his, Francis Ford Coppola, who brought that project, the concept of Star Wars, the space opera rather, to a division of Paramount Pictures, but they also didn't have any faith in George Lucas's ability to direct the film, so they turned it down as well. Next, they went to Walt Disney. Walt Disney turned it down as well. Really funny in hindsight now, right?
Yeah, they could have had a hella cheaper, but nah, they had to pay.
They had to pay. They had to pay like 40 years later. The project was finally picked up in June of 1973 by 20th Century Fox. And the studio president, I think his name is Alan Ladd, he admitted that he wasn't investing in the film because he didn't understand the technical side of it. But he did believe in the talent of George Lucas, and that's what he invested his money in, which is really funny in hindsight because that's the exact opposite of everyone else at the time. So originally, 20th Century Fox said, "Cool, we'll give you $150,000 to write and direct this space opera." That's like $1.1 million in today's dollars, roughly. And then American Graffiti opened, and American Graffiti was a smashing success. Smashing success. Now, George Lucas didn't have anything prior to this that was. So American Graffiti was like his his debut, right? I mean, it was his debut. People didn't know who he was. American Graffiti made him a household name. So once he had that clout, because of the success of American Graffiti, he renegotiated his deal with 20th Century Fox when it came to Star Wars. And he used that a bit he used that opportunity to negotiate control of the merchandising rights and the sequel rights to the film.
Damn.
Really good.
Yeah, that's insane.
Funny other side note I read in it. This pertains specifically to the original movie. So he was friends with Steven Spielberg, and Steven Spielberg had done Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right? You know that movie?
Yeah.
And so Steven Spielberg was doing that while George Lucas was doing Star Wars, and they made a bet. George Lucas was convinced that Close Encounters was going to do better than Star Wars, and so they bet each other like 2.5% of the royalties on each other's project. And since George Lucas said Close Encounters is going to be better, Spielberg said no, Star Wars is going to be better, and Spielberg obviously won, and so he collected like millions of dollars in royalties on this bet on the first movie itself, not subsequent ones. Just that first movie is my understanding. So the writing process is happening. We talked about it. 20th Century Fox, paid George Lucas $150,000 to write and direct, and they gave them a $5 million budget to produce the film. That would later eke it out to 8.25 during filming, and by the end, I think it was $11 million.
Damn.
And so filming began in March of 1976. It was only during production that he changed Luke's name from Luke Starkiller to Luke Skywalker. And at some point, they changed the name first simply to The Star Wars. And then by the time they were finished, he had settled on simply calling it Star Wars. So a lot of really fun, interesting stuff that are in there. One other really interesting thing from the process, the how Star Wars movies start out with a text crawl.
Yeah.
Originally, George Lucas had written a lot more. The first version that he presented to someone was 6 paragraphs that each had 4 sentences.
Oh, wow.
He showed it to a director friend who called it gibberish that ran on forever. And so it was whittled down to its final form, which is only 4 sentences.
Wait, it's really only 4 sentences? It
it's
seems so
only
much longer.
it's only 4 sentences.
Scrolling really messes with that
Now, of
projection.
course, there are so much more to talk about. George Lucas mostly casted unknown actors on purpose. There are a few exceptions in there that he thought would be good for roles. It's really fascinating how they designed so many of the special effects in the movie. My favorite is the land speeders. Is really just a like motorcycle car that has mirrors on the bottom to reflect back the desert, so it looks like they're floating, they're flying, like they're hovering. And that's such a simple special effect that is so effective. I love it. I
Heck
love
yeah,
it.
they had to use fancy technology to make it happen.
And they had to use little models. And I get why they did it. I wish they would redo it, but I don't like because they have a 1999 version of the movie that they have 1999 CGI added to it, and it's bad. And I really don't like that version of it. And I wish they would either go back to the original or they would redo it, because I think in 2025 you can redo that CGI and make it fit the original movie much better than you could in 1999. To be fair,
Yeah, well, just remember that they did, because you are talking the first of the original, right?
yes, they
The
redid the
do
yeah.
you remember? I was just reading recently that they're finally going to release the original 1977 edition.
Yep.
Like George Lucas can't stop it.
Yeah, because we're mad. We're all mad that the only version we have now is that 1999 with the shitty CGI. So
Yeah, I watched that recently, and when I saw Job, I was just like, I can't.
I
What?
watched it. I watched it because it's May the 4th was a couple days ago. I watched it a couple days ago
It wouldn't have
actually.
been Job on that one. That would have been the fifth one. But still, even still, the one
No,
that they redid for that
it was Jabba's in the original movie.
in the first.
He is when
Yeah.
it's when they're getting ready to leave. Mos Eisley, when they're getting ready to leave, he walks with him, and that's the worst. There's one point. Go back and look. There's one point in which Harrison Ford walks behind Jabba, and literally the frame skips. Like you can watch that they didn't know how to keyframe it at all with Jabba in the front, and so you could literally watch like Luke, like Harrison Ford, like frame skip when he walks behind Jabba. It is like the most. It's the worst. It's the worst in my opinion out of all the CGI they added to that version. It's the worst instance of it.
Damn, that's pretty bad.
It was. I had to. I stopped and went back because it's been a long time since I watched it. So I stopped and went back, and I was like, Did I just see what I think I saw? Yep, sure did. It's so bad.
Man.
I don't have a problem with what they added, like adding the creatures to Mos Eisley and like the scenes and like the Millennium Falcon. I don't have a problem with any of it, but either get rid of it or, like I said, redo it now when you know you can make it fit the movie. You know, you couldn't back then. Now it'd be so simple to make it fit the movie. So
True. True enough.
we could probably fill 10 episodes of a podcast talking about the production of the film itself. It was notoriously plagued with problems. So much so that to some, it looked like it was going to be a failure before it was even released.
Damn.
They did eventually they did eventually finish the film, as we know, just in time. In fact, they literally put the final cut of the movie together less than a week before its release date. So, like, just in the nick of time, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And
That's definitely
George
close.
and George Lucas wanted to release the film just before Memorial Day weekend, in a time when pretty much no one released a summer film before school was out. So theaters didn't want to show the movie. In fact, in order to convince movie theaters to show it, Fox had to package it together with another movie called The Other Side of Midnight, which was a film based on a best selling book. And they basically told the theaters, look, if you want Midnight, you have to show Star Wars as well. There's no ands, ifs, and buts about it.
I mean, good on them. Made the
So,
push.
so get this, man. On Wednesday, May 25th, 1977, Star Wars was released in just 32 theaters.
Oh wow.
They could only convince 32 theaters to show the movie on its day. On Thursday, 10 more. No, on Thursday, one more. We got up to 33. On Friday, 10 more. So we got up to 43 by the weekend. And then word of mouth got out there. And within a few weeks, Star Wars was playing in almost 1,100 theaters across the United States.
Damn. That's
People were lined up to see the film.
that's a crazy jump.
I mean, that, yeah, for sure. It's crazy to think of only 32 films carried that movie on its first day.
Yeah.
And I know we have stuff like that these days, right? Like we have movie premieres where they get limited releases in a small market before they go worldwide. But um, yeah, man, it's weird to think of 32 theaters on day one. Just so weird to think of. Obviously, Star Wars immediately broke box office records. It eventually became the first film to gross 500 million worldwide. I think adjusted for inflation, it's like the second best selling, like best grossing movie of all time. And franchise wise, it's the third best selling franchise movies wise. Number one is Marvel, and I think number two is might be Harry Potter, if I'm not mistaken. I think Star Wars is just behind those.
Which is
So
still shocking.
it's crazy. I can't get over the fact that no one wanted to. I can't get over the fact that one, no one wanted to finance it, and then no one wanted to carry it. Like, you and I were born in a world where Star Wars was just successful. Like, we've never known a world where anything else was the case, right? Star Wars has always been and will always be to us because of when we were born.
Yeah, I agree.
But once upon a time, it was a movie that no one had heard of. And things like that still blow my mind. I mean, it is. And I guess you could say the same for the Marvel universe, because one time those were just comic books, right?
Yeah, true.
Harry Potter was once just a book series written by an unknown author. But it's just so crazy to think of. It's just crazy to think of that there are so many ways Star Wars, and we talk about this time and time again in this podcast, right? There are so many ways that Star Wars could have not been. Everything fell together to make it the way it is, and for those of you that don't know, I'm assuming a majority of the people who listen to this podcast are friends of mine. Thank you, by the way. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I love Star Wars. I feel so blessed to live right now in an age when we get so much content created in this universe. I feel lucky every time we get a new Star Wars franchise of some way, shape, or form. I think it's the coolest thing ever. And it's crazy for me to think of once upon a time, 32 theaters showed it only begrudgingly because they had to piece together with a movie they actually did want to show. Nuts. Nuts.
Yeah, it's mind blowing looking at it. But again, in hindsight, we can never know.
We can never know. So, as we know, the kind of success that comes with one artistic medium, in this case it's movies, no doubt has its fans clamoring for more in other artistic mediums, right? So, Star Wars became everywhere. It was on t shirts and posters and action figures, and the soundtrack was here and there. And in time, as with all things, when a great story is told in one, visual medium, no doubt it's going to become, come to video games as well. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree.
Rob, when you think about how Star Wars almost didn't make it, rejected by studio after studio, rewritten 4 times, and barely just scraping together a final cut before release, it's wild that it became one of the biggest cultural touchstones of all time.
Absolutely. From No One Wants the Space Opera to breaking box office records and changing cinema forever. It just goes to show how powerful a single, well told story can be.
Exactly. And if you've got a story of your own to tell, or just a passion project that you want to share with the world, podcasting is a great way to do it. And with Zencaster, it's never been easier to start.
All right, I'm listening. What makes Zencaster the rebel hero of the podcasting world?
Well, Zencaster is your all in one recording studio that runs right in your browser. High quality audio and video recording with no need for fancy equipment or complicated setups. Just log in, hit record, and go.
Okay, but let's say I sound more like Jabba the Hutt on the first take. What then?
Well, that's where Zencaster really shines. Its post production tools clean up your audio, balance levels, remove background noise, and even take out all those filler words like or ah. They're like protocoid droids that scrub your tracks clean.
All right, and once I've got my very own Death Star of an episode ready, how do I launch it into the galaxy?
Well, Zencaster lets you distribute your podcast straight to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much everywhere else without ever leaving the platform. It's streamlined and efficient, just like a Death Star trench run should be.
I'm sold. How do our listeners jump to Lightspeed?
Well, that's easy. Just head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Whether you're just getting started or you've got an empire to build, Zencaster's got all the tools to help you do it.
So if you've got a podcasting idea with force level potential, Zencaster can help you bring it to life. No Jedi mind tricks required.
That's right. Just visit zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code MemoryCardLane and let your voice echo across the stars.
And now, let's get back to Star Wars video games that brought fans the opportunity to live out their own epic space opera.
Just like the movie, the very first Star Wars video game, which was released for the Atari 2600 in 1982, it was an absolute success. It was developed by Parker Brothers, and it was one of their two best-selling video games for the entirety of 1982, alongside Frogger. The two games collectively sold. It's reported that they sold a collective 3 million cartridges.
Damn.
It was called Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. It was a scrolling shooter game in which the player controlled Luke Skywalker in a snow speeder battling against AT-AT walkers on the planet Hoth. Those big, what do they look like? Camel looking things in the snow
Yeah, they're
planet?
camels.
Yeah. It's the best way to put it. Parker Brothers followed that game up in January of 1983 with a game called Star Wars Jedi Arena for the Atari 2600 as well, which, admittedly, poor video game. In retrospect, seen as a very poor video game. But it was still technically the first video game to feature lightsabers, and so we gotta give kudos where kudos is due. And essentially, Jedi Arena was inspired by that one scene in Star Wars, the original Star Wars, where Luke's like, he's got the helmet on and he's defending himself against shots from the Seeker Ball as he's like learning to harness his force file. So basically, it's got you like defending shots that are coming at you with the lightsabers, essentially.
Neat. I feel like that's a VR game too.
I think it is. Oh, Star Wars VR games are so cool. Don't get me started. They're so cool. Getting to wield a lightsaber firsthand is so cool.
Dave's off on another tangent.
That's right. All right, gotta bring it back. So, these two games made by Parker Brothers for the Atari 2600 and then other systems too were the very first pair of Star Wars games. They're really not the best known Star Wars video games. They kind of came and went with the Atari. You know, they you don't see a lot of re-releases for Atari games other than in Atari collections. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get you.
But the game that brings us here today, our topic for today, is probably the best known out of all these video games that were released during this initial Star Wars frenzy. And interestingly enough, it didn't actually start out as a Star Wars title, so it does have a story. And so our story, for video game purposes today, begins a few years earlier when Atari releases a 1980 first-person tank combat shooter called Battlezone. Now, we haven't really talked about Battlezone before, but we should. It should have its own episode. It's got an interesting history. But for today's purposes, you got to know that Battlezone was the first true 3D game that has a first-person perspective. It's really the first 3D success story in the video game industry, period. And by technicality, even though it's a first person tank shooter, it's a first person shooter, so it's also the first like notable and successful first person shooter in video game history. And
Damn.
it was an arcade cabinet. It was one of Atari's big hits. They sold 15,000 Battlezone cabinets, which makes it big numbers. Those are big numbers for an arcade cabinet. If it wasn't obvious by the term tank shooter, Battlezone has you driving a tank, which is attacked by other tanks and missiles, right? In order to play it, you're standing at an upright cabinet, and in front of you are two joysticks. One controls the right threads, one controls the left treads. You want to go forward like a tank, you push them both forward. You want to go back, you pull them both back. And if you want to turn, one goes up, one goes down, roughly, right?
Yarp.
These are tank controls. If you've ever played a game or driven a tank, you kind of know tank controls. They released this Battlezone Big hit. Game is everywhere. And after it's released, someone wants to use it as training for soldiers. Now, the story is, if you just kind of casually Google it, that the army reached out, the military reached out, the US military reached out to Atari and said, hey, we want you to redo this as a training simulator for our soldiers. That's not the case.
Damn. Oh.
What happened is almost as cool. There was a group of retired generals, so they're civilians at this point, and they saw the game and they thought that it would make a great tool for training soldiers. So this group of retired generals were the ones who commissioned Atari, and they wanted Atari to create a version of Battlezone that included realistic tanks and helicopters. Realistic U.S. tanks and helicopters and realistic Soviet tanks and helicopters, because the 80s are the Cold War. The Soviets are our biggest threat at the moment, right? And so the guy who made Battlezone, he's a guy named Ed Rothberg, and he does not want to do this because he objects to his game. He objects to Atari becoming involved with the military, right? But for whatever reason, he is convinced to do it. He reluctantly agrees to help design a prototype of a custom version on the condition that someone else would have to take his prototype and turn it into a finished version. So he didn't want to see it through, but he agreed to at least lay the groundwork down to basically to develop this realistic version. Now they did create a prototype, and it did end up at a military like simulator trade show, basically for the military. Nothing ever really came of the project other than there are two prototypes of this military version. They both currently sit in private hands, so it's not something you can go and find anywhere, unfortunately. But the controls that Rothberg designed, these tank controls that were kind of redone for this military simulator, they were meant to simulate sitting inside a Bradley fighting vehicle. And they didn't want that project to go to waste, so they were repurposed. They were put to use on another Atari project called Warp Speed. We don't know much about Warp Speed. Warp Speed is a canceled project. And Warp Speed was canceled because before Ed Rothberg could finish the game, he ended up leaving Atari to go found a new company. If you recall, this period of Atari was like when the Activision guys left. A lot of game developers weren't happy because Atari didn't want to give credit to their developers. They wanted to pay them salary, not royalties. So there's a lot of reasons. So Atari was losing people left and right. Rothberg left too. Rothberg leaves Atari. Warp Speed is a project sitting around. And as all these transitions are happening, Atari basically signs a licensing agreement with LucasArts. Lucasfilm, rather. Arts didn't exist at the time. And the licensing agreement was so they could create an arcade cabinet set in the Star Wars universe, right? So instead of letting Rothberg's project go to waste, Atari decided that they were going to repurpose the work that he had done. So Warp Speed became Star Wars, the arcade cabinet, and the art was redone to fit it into the Star Wars experience. So it was released on May 5th, 1983, and it's called the Star Wars. The Star Wars arcade cabinet simulates the assault on the Death Star across 3 connected sequences. In the first one, you engage in a dogfight against Darth Vader and enemy TIE fighters while the Imperial March plays in the background.
Nice.
In the second phase, you have to fly across the surface of the Death Star, avoiding, avoiding the
Turbo lasers.
the lasers, the artillery, to get to the trench. And the third sequence is the trench. You have to fly through the trench, and then you have to line up your shot, your little proton torpedo with the exhaust port. If you hit it, great. Sequence restarts from the beginning of hard difficulty. If you miss it, you go back to phase 2, trying to fly your way back to the trench to make another repeat try over it. So, and then again, if you win the whole thing, it just increases in difficulty. More TIE fighters, more triple lasers, so on and so forth, right? Star Wars was an incredibly popular arcade cabinet. Not really surprising considering Star Wars was an incredibly popular movie, right? Atari produced about 13,000 Star Wars cabinets. It was their top selling cabinet for all of 1983. And this is like the golden age of gaming. So this is a key title in the golden age of gaming. If you go and you look at lists of best games of all time, this arcade cabinet is typically on that list. It's one of the first, not the first, but one of the earliest licensed titles that was a smashing success. So it exists nostalgically to a lot of people, and it wasn't a bad game. It used vector wireframe graphics, and it did it well. And it really puts you it puts you in a flying ship with the joysticks like a flight simulator, right? Put you in there with a flight simulator and let you like live Star Wars out. I love this. This cabinet is still around to this day, to be honest with you. I love this arcade cabinet. When I find this in an old arcade, I play this typically. I still love it to this day. The graphics are nothing anymore because it's wireframe, but the chance to like get to relive that Death Star sequence, that's second to none, man.
Yeah, that's pretty sick.
Have you ever played it? Do you remember playing it at all?
I did not know.
Ugh. I still see it in some arcades somewhere, and I like I said, I find an excuse to play it every time.
Now, the only Star Wars arcade cabinet your game that I really got a chance to do was the pod racing.
Oh, pod racing was so good.
Yeah, it was fun.
Oh, that was another one. I think the most modern way you can play this, there's a GameCube game. I think it's like Squadron Alliance or Squadrons.
Rogue Squadron.
Is that what it is for GameCube?
I'm pretty sure it's
You
Rogue
can actually
Squadron.
you can actually unlock. This is like a hidden. It's hidden in the game. I don't know if it's unlocked through gameplay or code, but that GameCube game has a version of this that you can play if you can't find it in arcade anywhere.
That's cool.
This was ported over everywhere. It was on all the Ataris, like the 8-bit computers, 2600, 5200. It was on the ColecoVision. It was on the Commodore. Heck, it even got an MS-DOS release 5 years later in 1988. So, like, this cabinet made it everywhere. Once the hype died down, I mean, the hype never really died down because, like I said, you can still find this cabinet everywhere. But suddenly there wasn't a need for three of them. There was a need for one of them in an arcade. You know what I mean?
Yeah, makes obviously.
Atari actually released a conversion kit for this cabinet. I've never seen a conversion kit ever. It turns the original Star Wars arcade cabinet into a sequel called Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. I know it's not as popular because it was sold as a conversion. Only operators with excess inventory wanted to convert it. People that really only had one didn't want to convert their what was still a decently popular game uh, over to a different game. There may not have been the hype, but that doesn't mean people didn't want to play it, you know?
Yeah,
So
makes sense.
in The Empire Strikes Back, the dogfighting sequence is now a snowspeeder sequence that has some different parts to it. In one sequence, you're on Hoth searching for Imperial probe droids to destroy them. And then once that's successful, you're dropped into that AT-AT sequence looking to bring the AT walkers down. And then there's a second half to the game after you get past the sequence on Hoth that has you taking the role of Han Solo trying to escape an air Imperial ship in the Millennium Falcon. And first you have to like dogfight TIE fighters, and then you have to fly through an asteroid field to get away. Not as popular. Like I said, I've never seen the Empire Strikes Back version of the cabinet, but it's fascinating to me that that conversion kit is out there, and there's probably versions of this kit somewhere, you know?
Yeah, it actually sounds kind of interesting too.
Just a little side note, since we have games from the first couple movies, they actually did make a cabinet for Return of the Jedi as well. It came out a year earlier. The conversion kit was like 85 and the original was 83, and in 84 in the middle they made a Return of the Jedi cabinet which is not related to these two. Instead of using like wireframe vector graphics, this one actually uses like raster, like pixel, it's actual pixel art. And this is an isometric scrolling shooter that has three different stages. In the first stage, you're on a speeder bike speeding to an Ewok village. The second, you're in the Millennium Falcon trying to destroy a reactor. And the third stage has you like switching between an ATST and the Millennium Falcon in rapid succession to take down a Star Destroyer. So I'm guessing, if I remember correctly, the ATST takes down um, like shield generators on the ground or something like that, which then leave the Star Destroyer open to attack from the Millennium Falcon. So
That would be weird because they have their own shield. Just
shut up, nerd.
I'm just saying they do. Come on,
Yeah, for
they have their
sure.
own shield generators. It's the balls on top of the bridge.
All those games exist. All three of those arcades exist. Those pair of arcade or Atari 2600 games exist, and really those were the first handful of licensed games in the Star Wars universe. The next handful of games, I think I'd like to do an episode on it specifically because there's some fascinating things in there. But the next handful of games were like 8-bit games for the Nintendo and a bunch of 16-bit games for the Super Nintendo. Those should be done on themselves. Are really fascinating because there's actually two games, Japanese only Star Wars games. There's two of them, which is weird to think about. Like for the Nintendo, like for the Famicom.
Ah, okay, that makes more sense. Why?
The actual first console for that generation was like a 1987 or something like that. It was basically a Nintendo Famicom game that was only released in Japan. So, like I said, it's kind of weird. But anyways, that's a story for another time. I'm not gonna keep at it because like I said, we could talk about this movie and these games forever. I just want to do a quick light. It's not that quick because we're at time. I just kind of want to do a quick light episode on these early Star Wars games and talk a little bit about Star Wars because we really haven't gotten a chance of that yet. And I'm a big Star Wars fan. You're a big Star Wars fan. We both love
I'm a
Star
normal
Wars.
sized human person.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, of course, if you want to check out, in the beginning, we talked about some other titles that you could look at. For instance, the crappy Zelda games, Mystery House. We also looked at Eve Online, we've talked about before. We did a whole episode of Red Dead Revolver. If you're interested in any of them, we have an archives. You can check out old episodes anywhere we have podcasts like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, more. Also, you can go to our website. We have a whole archive section on our website. And of course, if you've never been there, our website is www.memorycardlane.com. And Rob, what else can people do on our website?
You can find our future episode topics, see what we are going to be talking about in our upcoming episodes. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come chat with us about episode topics or anything video gaming related, and sometimes not. You can also find links to our Patreon where you can help support us, get access to ad-free and unedited versions of our podcast. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is wrong. Each week, ladies and gents, we'll tell you one story relevant to the Crow Week in gaming history. This week, we're celebrating Star Wars. We've done it before on games, technologies, consoles, people, companies. I did an episode on the history of Nokia once. That was fun.
He did indeed. I forgot about that one.
They were not originally a technology company. They were like a lumber company in the beginning on the river of the Nokia River or something like that. I've
Go
done on
listen
a
and find out.
I've done on a museum once. We do lots of fun stuff.
Fun.
The best part about doing this each week is when I sit down to research a new episode, I learned something new. That's my favorite thing. I specifically sit down and go, what don't I know about this topic? And I write a story around what I don't know excitedly because I get to teach you what I don't know. And then eventually we both know new things. This fantastic cycle of learning and teaching, teaching and learning. And in celebration of said cycle, we like to go around table and talk about what we've learned every week. So, Rob, what did you learn about Star Wars today?
Well, Dave, I actually am willing to bet that we're going to have very similar answers today. So, what did you learn? What's
I
your big takeaway?
never paid attention to the fact that Star Wars was not a success from the get go.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I recently started hearing more about that as I go, but like I didn't realize the pure scope when you say 32.
Right? Right?
Like, I can hear that it wasn't as raging of a success and that people thought it wasn't going to succeed. But when you put it into numbers and you say 32, that's insane to think that something that now is billions of dollars.
I have seen documentaries and read plenty on the filming of the movie, the original movie. I I can tell you a lot about how it was not a smooth production process. How, like, they were teaching themselves how to do special effects, and this didn't work and that didn't work, and this person didn't get along with that person. It's well known that the production was not the smoothest process. For that matter, most movies are. A lot of movies aren't, right? But this one, being as so high profile as it is, like it's kind of well known as production. I never ever really tripped on the fact that it almost didn't happen to begin with. I didn't know that people kept shutting the door in George Lucas's face. I thought, here's the man that made American Graffiti and then THX 1138, and after that he got a golden ticket to make Star Wars. But the reality is Star Wars was happening alongside all that, and he was fighting to get this movie made until he broke it open with those, and then it was a much smoother process. But I'm with you. Like, I never knew 32. Like, I know limited release, but geez Louise, 32, and they had to force movies to show it by saying we'll give you the movie you want if you take the movie you don't want. That's nuts.
Yeah, that's the part that you just think that and it's just like, damn, like, why? How?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, Rob. Well, on that note, before we take it into next week, is there anything else that you'd like to add to today's episode?
I will take one quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to us that you join us week in, week out as we discuss episode topics and sometimes nerd out about things that we really are appreciative of. So thank you.
Absolutely. As we set aside our lightsabers and power down our X Wings, we are reminded of how Star Wars games brought the magic of a galaxy far, far away into our own hands. From arcade classics to epic adventures, they've allowed players to become the heroes of their own stories. So whether you're fighting the Empire or exploring uncharted planets, always remember the joy of living out your Star Wars dreams. Next week, we're trading the X Wing cockpit of the Star Wars arcade game for the bright lights and big reveals of the Electronic Entertainment Expo, better known as E3. For years, E3 was known as the stage for gaming's biggest moments, shaping the industry with console wars, legendary game announcements, and unforgettable surprises. Join us as we dive into the history of this iconic event and explore why it became the ultimate showstopper on next week's blockbuster trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Do up, dabba do up, dabba do up, dabba do up, do up.